The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations.
A new jolt hit North America when officials in Washington signaled a dramatic hardening of their stance toward Canada. What began as a routine policy message shifted into something far more forceful, an unmistakable warning that suggested a coming clash. The tone changed almost instantly, creating a moment that seemed like the opening move in a much larger confrontation. Before this report continues, feel free to support the work by liking the video and subscribing to stay updated with major geopolitical developments. Rather than de-escalating, U.S. pressure intensified. 3 of Washington's most influential decision-makers aligned their messaging, directing a wave of political and economic stress squarely at Canada. For a brief period, it appeared that all momentum was pushing in one direction, hinting that Ottawa might soon be boxed into a difficult corner as the region braced for sweeping fallout. The initial strike surfaced when the U.S. trade chief announced that the United States might step away from the North American Trade Pact once the 2026 review period arrived. It was not an offhand remark. It was a direct signal that the entire structure of continental trade, long taken for granted, was suddenly open to being dismantled. The implication was unmistakable. The arrangement tying the 3 economies together could collapse by choice, not circumstance. The escalation grew sharper when the U.S. president publicly stated his intentions to apply unprecedented pressure on Canada, even implying that Ottawa should be treated as though it were merely an extension of U.S. territory. The unusually blunt language unsettled diplomats and financial markets, creating shockwaves far beyond Capitol Hill. The final blow in this sequence came when the U.S. envoy to Canada publicly questioned Ottawa's rules surrounding political advertising and the potential effects across borders. Canada immediately rejected the accusation, causing negotiations to freeze and leading Washington to explore the possibility of splitting the trade pact into 2 separate bilateral agreements, one with Mexico and another with Canada. The regional equilibrium that kept North America stable for decades appeared to be at risk of fracture. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of weakening Canada, the pressure began looping back. The leverage meant to squeeze Ottawa started generating uncertainty inside the American economy itself, raising a much more complicated question. What if the strategy designed to isolate Canada ends up destabilizing the United States? The assumption in Washington was straightforward. Canada would buckle. Yet the opposite began to unfold. Rather than retreating, Canada shifted course strategically, turning a seemingly defensive position into an opportunity to reconfigure its economic architecture. The International Monetary Fund noted in late 2025 that Canada was showing remarkable adaptability despite the looming tariff threats. The findings suggested an economy adjusting more rapidly than many analysts had initially projected. Foreign investment surged, with inflows climbing to nearly $78 billion and total holdings reaching approximately $1.5 trillion. Observers believe the figure may have exceeded some internal U.S. predictions. Canadian companies reorganized their production routes into 2 separate systems, one dedicated exclusively to supplying the United States, the other aimed at reaching global markets. This restructuring reduced long-standing vulnerabilities. Industries began targeting Europe, India, and South America more aggressively, decreasing dependence on trade corridors that relied on U.S. transit. One region, Newfoundland and Labrador, quickly redirected over half of its energy exports toward European clients, a dramatic shift compared to the small fraction sent overseas 2 decades earlier. This transformation highlighted a deeper question. How can external economic pressure evolve into a catalyst for internal restructuring? Back in the United States, the reverse impact began to materialize. manufacturing output contracted for 9 straight months up to November 2025, marking the longest downturn since the financial crisis of 2008. Industrial firms specializing in transport equipment, a central benchmark of economic health, started reducing their workforce and relocating segments of production to more predictable foreign environments. Consumer activity reflected similar strains. Spending during Cyber Monday grew only modestly, indicating that tariff-driven uncertainty was placing pressure on household budgets. Major corporations filed legal challenges seeking reimbursement for tariffs, a move that could force Washington to pay out billions. Investment analysts began labeling the U.S. as a high-volatility policy environment, driving international funds to relocate toward markets viewed as more stable, Canada included. As American economic volatility increased, Canada emerged as a strategic destination for companies looking to mitigate instability. Canada maintained one of the highest foreign investment to GDP ratios among major economies, reinforcing its reputation as a reliable harbor for global capital. With more than 50 free trade agreements, firms based in Canada gained entry to numerous international markets without the uncertainty caused by U.S. tariff swings. Businesses from Europe, Japan, and South Korea increasingly placed their facilities in Canada. The goal was simple: operate near North America while avoiding exposure to unpredictable U.S. policy shifts. Canada's combination of advanced infrastructure, skilled labor, and consistent regulations made it more predictable than the United States, an increasingly pivotal factor in long-term strategic planning. These dynamics encouraged Canadian industries to rebuild internally. Manufacturers began returning production to Canada to reduce reliance on American components. Surveys showed that more than 70% of Canadian manufacturing leaders supported policies encouraging nearshoring and local supply chains. Many firms started funneling additional investment into local suppliers to guard against tariff disruptions and ensure production stability. Canada's export profile also evolved. Growth in technology, engineering, and advanced services began outpacing traditional commodity-driven exports. This signaled the formation of a new high-value economic layer. Emerging sectors, such as electric vehicles and critical mineral supply chains, benefited the most, positioning Canada as a clean, stable, and lower-risk source for resources essential to future industries. While global trade tensions led some economies to shrink their partnerships, Canada expanded outward. It strengthened connections with the European Union, India, and multiple Asian markets, turning a moment of crisis into a diversification advantage. Newfoundland and Labrador's shift away from U.S. dependency stood as a notable example. European governments, facing instability in other regions, increasingly viewed Canada as a secure source for energy and mineral imports. Meanwhile, Asian industries recognized Canada as a dependable entry point into Western markets, offering steady regulations and reliable transport routes. Canada's extensive free trade network positioned its businesses to bypass barriers confronting their American counterparts. As U.S. policy unpredictability grew, the opportunities available to Canadian exporters widened. This leads to a broader conclusion. Washington's pressure campaign is producing consequences that diverge sharply from what U.S. officials intended. Instead of forcing alignment, the strategy appears to be accelerating Canada's economic independence at a pace few projected. If the United States ultimately withdraws from the trade pact, one scenario suggests that Canada could rapidly strengthen its role as an alternative manufacturing and supply chain hub within North America. This outcome would represent a profound shift in regional economic dynamics, one that was likely not part of Washington's original calculation. With global corporations increasingly viewing Canada as a stable anchor point, the balance of economic power may be moving in ways that challenge long-held assumptions. Canada is building momentum across electric vehicle production, critical minerals, energy development, and high-tech industries. This raises an unavoidable question. Has Washington's attempt to apply pressure inadvertently transformed Canada into a far more competitive force along its northern border? Thank you for staying through this report. If you want to keep following these rapidly changing global trends, make sure to like and subscribe for future updates.